if you're going to overdose, you look a certain way. And if you look that certain way, you're never going to get out of it. And that's not true. To me, I'm in the recovery community, so I hear stories like this all the time, right? So for me, I believe in people, right? I know people can change. I know if they have the opportunity that they can make it, right? The problem is that, at least in that aspect, right, especially with addiction, a person that uses and is an actual drug addict, right, is somebody that is not a recreational user, isn't a heavy user, is a very difficult person to deal with. And it can be very hard to love that person because of the symptoms of alcoholism and addiction. And so what we may have a bad job doing as a society right now is destigmatizing that person and giving them the opportunity to be successful.
Welcome back, everyone, to the Henry's Uncle podcast. Today, we have the honor of talking to Theo Krzywicki. Theo is a full-time Los Angeles firefighter paramedic and also the CEO of End Overdose, an organization helping to end overdose and provide critical training on how to use harm reduction tools such as fentanyl test strips and Narcan. Theo also has over 11 years in recovery. Take a listen. Well, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Henry's Uncle. Really excited today. I'm get to interview the CEO and founder of End Overdose, and I will let Theo go ahead and introduce himself.
Pleasure to meet you. Excited to be here. Thank you for taking the time to talk to me, represent our organization. My name's Theo, CEO of End Overdose and its founder. So just a little bit about us. We started in Southern California. I'm a Los Angeles City firefighter and paramedic. I've been sober for 11 years. I started this organization with some friends because I personally lost my fiancée to an overdose, and it was devastating, right? And that kind of sparked me into a lifestyle of really wanting to help others, right? Like just really wanting to get in there, give back to the community, and also like affect some real change. And being a member of recovery, being in that community, I saw a ton of people overdose. And I had some experiences that were really, really hard, right? Some of those were as a paramedic going to a home of like a parent and a family member who their son overdosed. I remember pulling the guy out of the bathroom, right? And in the time that they had spent calling 911, by the time we got there, had probably been like 7 minutes, but they didn't know what they could have done to respond. And had they done rescue breathing, had they had Narcan, they would have saved their kid's life. He had just passed, right? And having that knowledge as a paramedic that you can intervene and save somebody provides a lot of security. And there's nothing more powerless than losing a loved one. And there's nothing worse than being in a situation where that person is overdosing and you can't do anything to respond. And for me, what blew my mind is that it wasn't readily accessible. It wasn't packaged in a way that was digestible for the everyday person, that if you wanted the resource, you had to go somewhere kind of far or distant. It seemed alien, right? With so many health services and things we're doing online, I was like, why can't you just click a button and get it, right? Like, what is that?
And that's what I've been looking for a long time, ever since I kind of got into this for, 3 years. And, in my day-to-day job is e-commerce, program manager of e-commerce systems. So you're kind of like, seriously, like how is there not a website where you just have a quick training and boom, it's done. It's automated. It's crazy.
It's crazy, right? So like, and then the other thing too, is that like in Southern California, just to give you some quick ideas and some numbers, right? It's one of the largest treatment center hubs in the country, right? So there's in Southern California region, there's over 3,000 drug treatment centers that are registered. If you do the census info, it's about 250,000 people a year coming to treatment, right? 80% of users or people coming into treatment experiment with pills, prescription pills, opioids. And for first-time people in recovery, it's about a 90% relapse rate, right? And that's from Psychology Today, right? It's really likely. And they're not required to have naloxone. So what happens is you're taking a new person in a new state and they're going to relapse. And the policy for a drug treatment center is to kick them out.
Yeah.
And they wonder why people are overdosing, right? And so for me, that blew my mind, right? But part of the entire culture for private treatment centers, right, is that we're not going to give them free resources because they have money, right? For me, I think that any client that's in a treatment center should have naloxone. They should have access to it. They should get the information. So rather than moralizing what's right or wrong, we just started going into treatment centers and training them. Didn't matter who you were, what you needed. We're just going to give you naloxone to these clients and train you. So we focus on, the drug treatment centers, the sober livings. We focus on nightlife communities where you have, clubs, bars, where you have people going that are using or just partying, underground events. And then we work with medical professionals, different clinics, and of course, campuses and schools, right? So for us, we started off in 2017. It was just me going to methadone clinics, training people. Now we have multiple offices. And last month, we reached in Los Angeles alone, we reached over 13,000 new people through direct outreach.
Wow.
Right?
That's amazing.
And every month we train over 1,000 new people. So these aren't repeat clients. These are people that we are meeting for the first time, brand new, and then training.
Wow. So is this, when you say direct outreach, this doesn't include your website for online training?
No, so this is our website. Like if we were to use social media numbers to say outreach, it would be really high, but they're not the best at if you look at calculate reach and analytics, it's like, this is a website view. It's like, well, how effective is that? This is somebody was on the ground. They came to us and either got a fentanyl test strip, got trained in Narcan, or we handed them some type of service material.
That is crazy. Those are big numbers. So, first of all, congratulations on, I believe you mentioned 11 years sober, and, sorry and terribly sorry about your fiancée. I can't even imagine the tragedy there. That's awful. If you don't mind, I want to go back because you did mention, 11 years sober. Can you take us back to that life, if you don't mind, and explain, your addiction? And,
the darkness, the void.
Yeah, the darkness. Yep.
The void. Well, I would say, so obviously there are many difficult things in life, but the struggle and the unmanageability of that lifestyle is insane, right? And there's so many different things that I could say on that, like, where do you want me to begin, right? Do you want me to begin with the first time I used? Do you want me to begin with like the war stories, the pain, right?
Yeah. I mean, again, we don't have to go into the war stories, right? It's a different time and place. For me, I would say, you mentioned you're born and raised in LA, correct?
No, I'm actually born and raised in Seattle, Washington.
Oh, okay. I'm up here in Portland, so
yeah, very similar.
Not too far away. I like to go back to people's childhood. What was your life growing up like? Was it kind of the basic idyllic family, or was there trauma?
Yeah, I mean, when I grew up in a very simple neighborhood, right? Like Seattle is pretty liberal, right? It's really green. It rains a lot, kind of sets the tone to be a drug addict in a lot of ways, dark, gloomy, right? And for me, there was nothing remarkable that stood out about my childhood, right? Like, we weren't rich, we weren't poor, going to school, went to public school. My mom was a librarian and my dad was a communication salesman, right? So simple. But what happened in our community is by the time I was getting into high school is when the opioid epidemic in Purdue Pharma and OxyContin was hitting hard, right? And what I saw was my community and the people that I grew up with starting to get really strung out, man, right? Like just starting to start taking these pills. Like the girl that I was in love with, her dad was like a laborer, right? He was a construction worker, and they prescribed him OxyContin for pain, right? Just as a non-addictive pain medicine, right? And he's getting 90, 80 milligram OxyContins for pain,
Jesus.
Right? And so what ended up happening, at least I started, everyone started using it. It started becoming part of like day-to-day culture. And what happened is people started transitioning to harder drugs, right? And like one of the most difficult things to see, at least for me, like Seattle's not a huge city like LA. If you've ever been in Los Angeles, it's got urban sprawl forever, yeah. Right?
Just fly over it.
All over it, right? Yeah. If you are in Seattle, it's like a city center, and then you leave and it's the forest, right? You're in the woods, man, right? But our community was really tight knit, right? The people I went to elementary school with, I grew up with all the way into my teenage years. So when you were really close, and to watch people transform through using was very difficult because those people started going to prison. They started making decisions, started turning to prostitution, started turning to all these things. And that became the reality and normal. And so it's almost like a bad dream, right? It's kind of like you have, you're just a kid, and then all of a sudden somebody's, snorting Oxycontin, and then they're committing a crime, and then they go to prison for the rest of their life. You're like, geez, what happened, right?
Yeah, no, it's, you mentioned those stories, right? And right now the who knows how long this has been going on, 3 years with the Sacklers, and going through the court system. And I shouldn't even say 3 years, because they've been through the process, 2 other times before that. And it's like, you mentioned, someone snorting an oxy and going to prison, or turning to prostitution. And here we are, and they're being shielded from liability, criminal liability. And it's just the most frustrating thing when you hear story after story after story. And you mentioned, like, your community, how tight knit you were, and seeing, you mentioned, 90, 80 milligram pills. I mean, it's absurd. That's absurd. And everyone's compensated on the back end. And it's just very frustrating that the community, or the nation at large, has, the amount of havoc it has wreaked upon, and they're shielded from liability and going to pay out $6 billion, which, is probably not a whole lot for them. So it's just, it's frustrating when you hear that kind of stuff.
It's super frustrating, but at the end of the day, like, we're a 501c3 nonprofit, right? Our focus is on resources, getting them to people, and saving people's lives, right? There are great organizations that do battle at a government level, but we don't do that. We don't even comment on it, right? Actually, one of the people that helped me start End Overdose, one of the members of our board, is named Ryan Hampton.
Yep.
And, he's awesome, right? He was part of the core team that released the first ever Surgeon General report on addiction in 2016. And I think Forbes magazine singled him out as the #1 recovery entrepreneur, right? Like, for social movement. And basically I was a paramedic at the time, and I was responding to these overdoses, and I felt really impassioned about it. I met him. He was talking to me about being a paramedic and how do you respond to overdose. And he said, you should do a nonprofit. You should create something and train people on how to identify and respond like you do in the field, right? And I surprised him because I took him up on it, right? I said, okay, right?
Yeah.
Sounds like a plan, right? But our whole philosophy isn't like, because the thing is, we're not doing anything really new or special. Tons of people are doing what we're doing. The way that we do it differently is the way that we package it and the way that we deliver that messaging. What we try and focus on is we're not just distributing Narcan, right? If you've never used Narcan before and I say, hey, it's super easy, here you go, take it, just squirt it in somebody's nose, live your dreams, I'm actually doing you a disservice. Because when you're in that crisis, if you've never been in a situation where you're responding to save someone's life, it's a lot. It's even harder when it's someone you love, right? So what we do is we make sure that the training covers points and procedures that are standardized across harm reduction services, and we deliver them in a very simple way. So when you're in that crisis, you have the security and the ability to respond, right? And for us, we have an online training program. We're doing a second volume of it right now. We created it for COVID, and it's janky, man. It's definitely can be a lot better, right? Like, I'm narrating, it's like, okay, but we got it out there because it covers all the points that we need to, and it gets the service to people, right?
And and I'll say this, I just took it yesterday. It was a 3 or 4 part series with the questionnaires, which I'm not a good quiz taker, but I passed. But no, it was good because it's been about 3 years, and like you said, like, it's very easy to go tell someone, hey, it's very easy to spray it in the nose, right? But then again, it's nice. It's been 3 years since I've been trained to go over those points again. You got to shake them hard. You got to, ball your fist up and put it into the chest and really press down into the sternum, right? Like, all that stuff that you just kind of, it just seeps out of your brain due to, everything going on in the world, just to kind of get a nice refresher. And then also with the intramuscular Narcan, right? That was a great instruction. I've never been trained on that. So to use it in the muscle area, right? In your shoulder, in the buttocks, it was good to see that, it's a fairly easy process, but it's also nice to visually see it, and then also see someone, from coming into the door, seeing an overdose, a fake overdose with your training, but and going through each step point by point. So that was really nice. It was
so you saw the
refresher.
last few videos, right, on fentanyl test, higher quality, right? It like kind of jumps, right? It's like boom, boom. So we're making our main training video of like a higher quality like that, right? We just keep growing and growing, so we have to focus on things. But another thing that we're working on is this destigmatization of intramuscular naloxone, right? because you can give out more dollar valued intramuscular naloxones and get it out to more people than you can intranasal, because intranasal is $75 a box.
And how much is the intramuscular?
So it depends. It ranges, right? Like you can get it from companies, you can get it from Pfizer, you can get it from McKesson. It can be anywhere from $7 to $40, right?
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay.
It's less expensive than spending 75, right? And so from a harm reduction service, right, to give you an idea, right, like we gave out 1,200 doses not too long ago in California, and that's $90,000 worth of medicine, right? And so to supplement that, right, you have states, counties, organizations that are very large that provide harm reduction groups like myself these type of resources. So in California, the Department of Public Services of Public Health for the state is amazing, right? But they're being led alive by everybody. They can't support the entire state. You have companies like Direct Relief, which does huge nonprofit work that gives out resources. But again, like they're trying to support the entire nation. And so a huge resource for us is those larger organizations and then direct donations and support. So for us, obviously, we're newer. Like when people contribute to us, when they make a $5 donation, a $10 donation, it goes such a long way because it allows us to do these services, right? What we do right now is we make sure that we provide services nationwide. So if you need naloxone, you live in Texas, Indiana, and you need it, you can go take our online training, and we only ask you to pay for shipping to cover that.
Yep. Right? $8 for me.
That's it. Send it.
Yep.
And part of the thing that we're trying to do with that too is take away the stigma from needles, right? It does seem scary, right? It seems really scary. You're like, oh my God, I'm stabbing somebody. But when you're in an emergency situation, you're going to be so happy that you had something. You're not going to care if it's intranasal or intramuscular. You're just going to be like, thank God I have this.
Yep. No, I can agree. You know, I don't know how many people I actually, I don't even know if I've told this story on the podcast or, you know, very limited amount of people in my life is, you know, I did experience an active overdose once. And again, this is a decade ago, maybe. And I had absolutely no idea what to do. Had no clue what was happening. All I did was call 911. And then, you know, luckily an ambulance was there within, 5 minutes. And that was the first thing. And so I think, you know, the nasal Narcan came out in like 2015 or 2016 or something. So back then it was intramuscular. And I just remember right into the quad and boom. I mean, it was night and day. I mean, it was like someone's dying to someone is literally awake, not knowing what is going on. And, you know, to the hospital they go, right? You know, it's just, it is a miracle drug. And people, it's hard to talk to people who say, well, it enables more, drug use, et cetera. Well, I've met too many people on this podcast and who were, Narcan might have been once, might have been twice, even up to 10 times, but they are in recovery and leading an amazing life. So you can't tell me it just enables more drug use. It enables someone to keep, trying to get in recovery to lead the life they want. I mean,
well,
it's crazy.
I run into a lot of people like that, right? Like we help a wide range of people, right? And when I hear that, I don't get angry anymore. Before I used to get really bad, like, how dare you say that, you fool? But like, okay, I can empathize with that, right? Like maybe you don't think that overdose is part of your life. It's far away. You have this notion from it. You grew up, no one in your family does drugs. You're like, why do I care about this? Just don't use them, right? And up until now, the entire atmosphere of our messaging has been just say no, don't do them, stay away from them. If you use drugs, you're bad. But at the same time, the media culture portrayed, Wolf of Wall Street, he's doing lines of blow, like he's doing a great time. It's like, yeah, we support you doing drugs until you have an issue with them or you die, and then you're a bad person, right? Like, wait, what's going on, right? And like, not everyone that uses is a drug addict. It's not the case, right? Like you may use recreationally and you're not a drug addict, right? Just because you had an overdose doesn't necessarily mean that you were like, a denizen or you were like me when I was using, right? You could be very different. And so we really try and focus on looking at what does that mean, right? Like when someone says, hey, does this enable use? And for us, it's like, well, if someone's using drugs, they're going to use drugs no matter what, right? They're going to use them anyway, right? They were going to use them whether Narcan was there or not. But wouldn't you rather have the ability to respond if something goes wrong, Wouldn't you want the ability to test something, right? That recreational user. The big thing now is fentanyl, right? Fentanyl is 100 times more powerful than morphine, and it is being cut into every fake prescription pill that there is, right? If you're buying something off the street, if you're buying methamphetamine, molly, ketamine, any of that, it's being cut with fentanyl. And for that recreational drug user that isn't necessarily like a hardcore addict, right? If they test positive for fentanyl, they're not going to do it. They're going to be like, crap, that was a close one. And we know that because we distribute those fentanyl test kits. People tell us they get a positive test and they're like, thank God I had that, right? And thank God I had Narcan in case anything went wrong, right? So it doesn't enable usage. It just enables you to save someone's life.
So what would you say to organizations, that, or not organizations and or people that say, well, fentanyl test strips don't work? They say it's, let's say, I'm just, thinking of an example here because, there is, when you think of a pressed pill, I mean, you're not going to, once it's pressed, it's pressed and it's not going to be moving around. So what happens if they shave off a little bit of a pill on one side, but the fentanyl's on the other side, right? It's like, your video says these aren't 100% guarantee. So what would you say to those, organizations or people that just, to me, when I look at the atmosphere around fentanyl test strips, it's, one side is it's harm reduction, push them out there. The other side as well, they don't work.
Sure. Well, I mean, I would ask you, what goal are you trying to accomplish, right? The goal you're trying to accomplish is you're trying to test whether or not there's fentanyl in it. And they do that. They actually do it really well. They're one of the best things that we have to do that, right? They test for a huge amount of analogs of fentanyl. But there are some caveats. They're designed to test urine. But what ended up happening is that the company that made them found out that they could be used in a harm reduction atmosphere, and they're making that test better. One organization that works extremely close with the manufacturer of these fentanyl test strips, the company BTNX, right, is called DanceSafe. And they have doctors and analysis. They're the only nonprofit in the country that produces their own drug testing equipment. And they make Marquise tests, right? And we had a conversation with them. They talk to this company all of the time. And they learn how they can make it more accurate and better. And they're working on it, which is very promising, exciting, right? And these tests are effective. I mean, sure, like if you're testing a certain type of material, if you're testing a powder, you absolutely have to be cautious, right? You are testing something that could potentially kill you. You always need to be ready for the worst in that situation, right? And for you to downplay it is a disservice to you and anyone else, right? Like you wouldn't do that with anything else, right? If you were testing for a poison, you wouldn't say like, oh, it'll probably, and you wanted to save someone's life. And this thing was like, yeah, it usually works. It's really good at it. You wouldn't be like, oh, no, I'm not going to use it. Right. Because in this case, it won't work. You would be like, well, thank God I have it. Let me give it a shot because I really don't want to get poisoned and die. You would use it immediately. So I'd ask you kind of like, why does it change? Right. Why does it change in this case? Right. And it is an excellent way to engage somebody that, they want to be safe. They want their friends to be safe. Maybe they don't do drugs, but they know friends that do. And they just have them in their bag and they just give them to their friend and be like, hey, I learned about this thing. Why don't you just test what you're going to take before so we know, right? So we have something as opposed to just, hey, I'm going to go by the seat of my pants. Anything could happen. Good luck. Because I'll tell you right now, drug dealers aren't regulated by the FDA. Nobody's looking over their shoulder to make sure that they put what they said they would. I don't care if it's a friend of a friend. Tommy doesn't have a lab at home and he's not synthesizing the drug to tell you the percentage and the amounts of every single one, right?
Yeah. No, it's a wild landscape out there and it seems like it's just getting more and more deadly. So no, it's just with the fentanyl test strips, it's very interesting how there's really two sides to it. Like I feel like there's no in between a whole lot. So it's, that's why I wanted your take because, for me, any tool to help fight this epidemic, we need to deploy.
Absolutely. And fentanyl test strips are amazing because you have a type of person, right, that isn't willing to use Narcan. They don't see its applicability. They're not going to take a Narcan training. They're not going to be okay to respond, but they will test something or they'll tell their friends to test something, right? And what you're doing in that moment is you're starting to soften them and bring them over. And you're also, the moment they get that test strip, they're engaging in something better that's going to help someone's life. And if all you have to do is give someone a test strip, show them a video and give them resources on how to use it, you're making a positive impact. You're reducing that stigma. You're getting people invested, right?
Yeah, it's wild. Like I love this. When you guys share some stories on social media. When someone writes in saying, "Hey, I just tested my drugs, last night, and it tested positive for fentanyl. So thank you for saving my life." It's like, and from someone who has lost someone to fentanyl, I mean, it's like, thank God that's another person saved. That's another family that doesn't have to go through the grief and the funerals and everything else. It's wonderful. So in terms of fentanyl test strips, I mean, those are how much those cost.
It depends, right? I mean, you have to have like a doctor's code to be able to get it, right? They aren't just sold to the general public, right? So what we actually have people do is we have them attached to them is like how to use them, resources, all the information that you need for it. We deliver them in a package and we sell them for cost, right? So for us, we sell them for like $7, which is adds up all the costs for the packaging, everything like that, and delivery. We don't make money off of that. The reason why we can't if you're in person and you're with us, right? Like we give them out for free. But across the nation, we've had such a huge demand for fentanyl test strips. We actually had a problem, right? We were giving out them free. We give them out free in California. If you come to our offices or you're running an event over here, we give you a few thousand, no problem, right? But we had such a huge outpouring, we had to make a decision. Are we going to sell these things for cost or are we going to give it out for free? And if we didn't, because our funding was lacking, we would have imploded overnight, right? We had one post that went viral and we ran out of supply in a day.
Jeez.
Right? And
that's wild.
Last month, we gave out 11,000 test strips, right? So like they're on the rise, right? They're on the demand. We're limited by our funding. We're limited by the resources that we have, right? And what we're trying to do is our home focus and our home base is in California. Well, we can't ignore the rest of the country, right? And that's where our online chapters come in. They're doing insane work, right? And then we are also popping up groups in other states.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, I love seeing your team and all the volunteers that come out and do the packaging, and it's amazing the amount of packages you guys send out. It's really incredible. So I kind of want to go back. So you mentioned 11 years sober now, and was it you became a firefighter paramedic? Was it why did you become how did you get into that field, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. So I moved out to Los Angeles when I was 19. I worked a bunch of bad jobs, right? I wouldn't say they were bad. They just weren't really exciting. They weren't fulfilling, right? I worked as a mattress store salesman. I don't know if you've ever seen those like sit and sleep commercials and like,
yeah,
feels like a used car salesman. You're like 22, you're wearing a collared shirt. You're like, hey, what's up, guys? You want to come in and lay on this bed? You're just like, oh God, everyone's smoking cigarettes. You're just, it's like sleazy, man. You're like, not about it. So I wanted something more, right? And I was always interested in psychology and public health. And I managed a sober living for a couple of years. I saw how that impacted. I started working in treatment. I was getting ready to do operations. And it wasn't the type of impact that I wanted to make. I wanted to physically be there and help somebody when they were dying, right? And so I met somebody that was a fireman. They were really happy about it because they were an EMT. They became a paramedic. And I fell in love with it, right? And for me, I became EMT and became a paramedic. And I was actually on the cusp of deciding whether or not I was going to go be a physician's assistant, because becoming a fireman takes forever. The application process takes years. You have to apply, you have to wait for an interview, over 20,000 applicants at the same time. And then it's a lottery system for you to even get an interview. So you could not be guaranteed. You have to be chosen out of a batch. It's a roll of the dice, right?
I had no idea.
I was almost done. And I personally, I love medicine, right? Like I was just found it so interesting. And so I was about to go that route. And then I got the call to join, right? And I was like, all right, I'm in, let's do it, right? And for me, it's been that experience because there is something so powerful about being with somebody in their worst moment, right? And being able to make a difference, right? What is a crisis for someone that would ruin their life? I work in MacArthur Park, which is in downtown Los Angeles, right? In that district for LA County, it is the highest percentage overdose rates. We go on multiple overdoses every single day.
Are you still active?
Still active.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I do that for 72 hours a week, and then I do End Overdose full time. I'm always tired. It's crazy, but I live and die by the calendar, man.
That's amazing.
And I've got a bunch of people that help me out, right?
Yeah.
I got Vanessa, my chief strategy officer. I've got my best friend, who's also my COO, Chris Poyena. I got my logistics manager, Damian Williams, and like we just trudge. But for me, like making that impact, it just mattered, right? Like I just knew I was doing something good, right? And then you're part of that community that you're in, right? You see those people on a day-to-day basis. You get to know the people in that neighborhood, and it also gives you an experience that most people will never have in their lifetime, right? Which is you're living two lifestyles in one lifetime. You're seeing the worst of the worst and how it ruins and ravages lives, right? It's one thing to be in a sterile environment like a hospital, and it's another thing to go into someone's house when their son or daughter is overdosing, revive them, and then also tell them, hey, there's something you can do to help prevent this in the future.
Yeah, if you don't mind, because right now I'm actually just in the middle of just started Killing Season, the book, which is written by a EMT out in Hartford, Connecticut, and I'm like just 20 pages in, just started last night. So it's his first glimpse into it. I mean, it just kind of gets your breath going. Kind of take us on a day-to-day basis of what you see, like you mentioned, and you work in are active in MacArthur Park. What is that like when you go and find someone overdosing?
Yeah, I mean, so where I work is not like a lot of places, right? It's one of the busiest stations in the country. It's one of the most intense stations in the country, right? They're not all fire stations are like this, right? Like if you're in like maybe Seattle or some part, like maybe this isn't happening for you, right? But, for us, it's when we go into our job, we don't stop responding to emergencies until the next day. That's how busy we are. So to give you an example, like, a normal fire station maybe runs 6-7 calls a day. We run 30, right? That's more than one an hour, all day, nonstop. And those calls range from something real simple, like someone's water heater is broken, their house is flooding, to a structure fire. Los Angeles is having more fires than it's ever had in its history, right? To overdose. And overdoses are very critical, right? Because the person isn't breathing. They're always serious, especially when that call goes out. We already know that person's in bad shape, right? We get some call notes that come up, right? And for us, it affects all different types of people, right? It affects people on the street, right? So you might have somebody, for example, we had a call just the other day. You're driving up on scene. You get a call with the notes of the Yoshinoya. You have a guy in a gutter, runoff, covering his body. His body is covered in sores, right? He's pale. He's blue. He's screaming. A crowd is forming. This is LA. This is a major city circling around you. We know that we can save him. For us, it's very simple. We give intravascular naloxone, right? We start an IV. We have to go wherever we can, right? For us, it's not always in your wrist, right? Sometimes it's in your neck. If you can't find it, you're going into the neck, right? You're giving this person breathing, right? You're ventilating for them. You insert this medication, and typically what happens is because you've been rescue breathing for this person, they come right out of it, right? And they thank you, but that's not always the case, right? Sometimes people have been down for too long where we have to do an advanced airway and take them to the hospital and make sure they're okay. And you would say, wow, that's a big call. How many of those did you have? And we've had them back to back to back. We had 3 within 20 minutes, all within a block radius. Because what happens if it's a bad drug batch goes out or a strong drug batch goes out, it affects everybody.
God. And so you've been doing this for 11 years now?
Oh, no. I've been in EMS for about 7. I've been with the fire department for 3. Yeah.
Okay. So in that 7 years, you said EMT for 7 years, I'm sorry?
Paramedic.
Okay, paramedic.
We're different. It's like a whole thing for us, man. It's like the EMT's like the assistant. They do great work. The paramedic, like, just giving the drugs. It's like it's a whole caveat for our species, man. We're just like, no, we're different, man.
No, I didn't know that. So that's good to know. So, in that 7 years and then 3 years, working in the fire station, how have you seen the drug landscape change in terms of overdoses and everything going on?
So before you would have, painkillers like OxyContin was bad. You have people overdose. They would be able to administer naloxone maybe, but it wasn't as common, right? Overdose is as common. Now I know when I go to work, I'm responding to at least 3 in every day, right? And that's
just one station.
One station. That's one station in a city of 4.3 million people. And that's insanity, right? That's insanity. You have people losing it all over the streets, right? It is an epidemic of huge proportions, right? From the lowest of the low to the highest of the high, right? You're going from areas where you are dealing with people that are forced to live on the street to some luxury, high class apartments on the top floor of a building, and they were doing something and they're passed out.
It's amazing when you put it in that perspective, right? Like, I remember, I found my brother that day, and growing up my whole life, you have that stereotype, don't do drugs. Drugs are bad. People who use drugs are, bad people, right? And then, walking downtown, in Portland, we have, just like LA, it's the homeless crisis just seems like it's getting worse and worse. And then, of course, you have that stereotype, right, of people who are homeless and, oh, they're probably, on drugs or et cetera, so on, right? And you always had that. And here I was that night. He's on the 17th or 14th floor, overlooking the main stadium here in downtown Portland. I'm going, what's the difference? There is no difference. One died in the house and one dies on the street. But it's the same thing. And we have this weird perception, and but it's all the same, and this does not discriminate whether rich, poor, bad or good. It's just so sad. So it's just wild. I can't even imagine going to work each day thinking you got to do 3 of those and then seeing people, in that condition. I mean,
it's not for everybody, but the difference is I have the tools to respond, right? So I have a lot of security in being able to have gone through the training, having the experience to do it, and then making sure that people that don't survive, right? And that is very gratifying, right? And then giving them the tools that they need to respond on their own, right? And what I find actually more often, right, is there are great work happening in Los Angeles, right? We have Homeless Healthcare Los Angeles. We have the Community Health Project in Los Angeles. We have Safe Med LA, and they are crushing it, right? But they're limited in resources as well. But it's happening at every level, and it always is the same, right? An overdose is an overdose, man. And if it's happening to somebody on the street, if it's happening to somebody in a house, if it's happening to somebody in a high-rise apartment, right? Like, it's crippling to the people around them, especially the people that love them.
Yeah, no, it's wild. It's crazy. There's really no words to it besides it's just tragic and very sad. So it's incredible. I mean, you got into recovery. You went through the darkest of the dark, got into recovery, got sober. For 11 years now. It's a again another wonderful recovery story where worked and now you're EMS into firefighter, active firefighter, working starting a 501c3 nonprofit to help end overdose by providing Narcan nationwide, fentanyl test strips, providing trainings. It's really an incredible story. I truly love it. It's amazing. Again, it's for me, I feel like one of the issues is we never hear about the recovery stories. Like, we see the people on the street or people who are close to us who may be using, but people love that, like the war stories, as you mentioned, right? The dark stories of it, but we never feel like we never hear about the recovery side, and I feel like is one critical step we need as a nation to really highlight.
Yeah, I agree. I think that, there's this imagery in the nation that, like, if you're going to overdose, you look a certain way. And if you look that certain way, you're never going to get out of it. And that's not true. To me, I'm in the recovery community, so I hear stories like this all the time, right? So for me, I believe in people, right? I know people can change. I know if they have the opportunity that they can make it, right? The problem is that, at least in that aspect, right, especially with addiction, a person that uses and is an actual drug addict, right, is somebody that is not a recreational user, isn't a heavy user, is a very difficult person to deal with. And it can be very hard to love that person because of the symptoms of alcoholism and addiction. And so what we may have a bad job doing as a society right now is destigmatizing that person and giving them the opportunity to be successful, right? There's still a notion in this country that you should just get better.
Yeah. Yeah.
You should just not do it, and you should just get better, right? And unfortunately, doesn't really work. You got to give people love. You got to give them the opportunity. You got to give them the resources. You got to create a safety net around them, and you got to work to bring them up. And that's the biggest part, man. It takes work. And unless you're willing to do that, you're not going to give people the best chance that they have to recover, get better, and stay safe. And the same thing goes for outreach. When you're trying to get people to engage in these harm reduction services, you have to go to them. You have to let them know, and you have to do it on their terms. All of our messaging, when we're reaching out to different communities, we work on having someone from that community and that demographic take our message, but deliver it in a way that that community can hear, because they may not be able to hear it from me.
Yeah, sure. If I may go back a little bit, what was, your moment in terms of you want to get into recovery?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just got lucky, right? I think that a lot of it is by circumstance, right? Like, I'm not special, right? I don't have any other special attribute than anybody else that is in recovery that's dealt with addiction, right? I'm not remarkable. For me, what happened is I was in a place where I had lost a lot of people that were close to me, right? I was in a different state. I didn't have the support of my family or my friends. I was isolated and I was alone, right? And for me, one of the things that is different, the difference between somebody that is a recreational user, a moderate heavy user, and a drug addict is that a moderate user would have an experience that would say, okay, this was really bad. Maybe they lost their kids, or they were going to lose their job, or they had some significant event and they were like, okay, that's it. And they change, right? The difference for the addict is they have that experience. They don't learn from it, right? They think that if only I can get more money, if only I can get more, if I can manage these things in my outside life, then I'll be okay, right? Maybe that's like a house, a job, a career, a family. And with the caveat that if I get those things right in my life, I'll be able to use normally. It'll be okay for me to do drugs. And I'm missing the whole mark. There's a mental blank spot that comes with their using, because there's this obsession that I can control it. But once you're at that point, right? Once you're doing like heavy drugs and you're like losing all this stuff, like you're never going to get back to normal, right? But that's an obsession. Like, it's a mental disorder. It's a huge mental disorder, right? And for me, I had gotten to a place in recovery, we call it a moment of clarity. But it's just enough space for you to see the way that you're living. It doesn't have to be that way. And there are many paths to recovery, right? There's no capitalization on it, right? There's Narcotic Anonymous, there's AA, there's Smart Recovery. Some people just they manage it, right? They use some type of substance, they get medication, they see therapists. There's many ways. For me, I realized that there was a plan outlined in one of the 12-step programs, right? And for me, that I was able to do that. I knew that that was something that worked for other people, and it was a route that I went down, and I was willing enough to listen. And I applied some of the things that I learned in that into my life, and my life began to change. And I became less focused on what I really wanted from life, like, your plans, your ideas, like, oh, I want to be this thing, I want to go to college. And I was like, where am I going to be the biggest use to other people? Right. And then I just started to shape my life around that. Where can I be the biggest use to other people?
It's funny going through all these podcasts and talking to people in recovery. I found this, for me, thinking to myself probably almost every day now, which, you and many other people who are in recovery have, helped shifted my perspective is how can you be a service to others? And, I love that, because I feel like, people in recovery are so about gratitude and service to others that it's infectious. And talking to, I don't know how many people so far, it's got me amped up where, what does my life look like 5-10 years down the road? How can I be a service to others instead of, focusing, specifically on my career and things of that nature. Right. So I love that. It's you guys are very, very infectious, and you can see why people in recovery are very successul, because when you stop thinking about yourself and thinking of service to others, you go a long, long way.
And it's nice, it's just nice to help other people. You know what I mean? It's just fun. Yeah. Like, it's good. There's society right now is really inwardly focused, man. It's okay to just
yes, it is.
It's just like, all right, like, hey man, you having a good day? Just giving someone a little nudge.
Yeah, that's awesome. As we kind of wrap up here, I just want to, I don't know if you deal with it in MacArthur Park here. I'm not familiar exactly. I know where it's at in downtown, but where your station serves, with the rise of, I shouldn't say the rise of, with social media and the different Snapchats and TikTok, all that kind of stuff, and how easy it is now for especially teenagers and young adults to procure drugs. Is your station specifically seeing a rise in people younger and younger overdosing, or is that more out in the suburbs?
Oh, yeah. No. So that's very common, right? I mean, the Los Angeles County Public Health actually did a report for Los Angeles specifically, right? And their 2020 data showed that the highest percentage increase was between 12 to 17-year-olds through opioid overdose.
12 to 17.
That's right. And it was a 200% increase, right? Fastest growing. And if you think about it, that's actually makes a lot of sense, because what you have is you have a far more powerful drug. That's typically around the age when people start experimenting with drugs and they're not sure how much to take. They're not like used to it. And that sounds pretty dark, but it's a dark thing. Right? And what's happening is you're seeing younger and younger people die, right? I mean, we're really heavily influenced by, we work in nightlife, we work with music, we would do a lot of things in that. And if you look at, some influential stars that are coming up, Lil Peep, Mac Miller, Juice WRLD, all overdose, right? All very young. And it's getting younger and younger and younger. And the truth is it's going to get worse unless we do something. And it doesn't have to be that way, right? We focus on reaching out through social media, those platforms, and making naloxone and fentanyl test strips accessible to everybody. And by working with us, you're also helping people get those resources.
It's an interesting question, because this problem, it seems like with opioids and being able to, kind of a spotlight on pharmacies and the distribution side of it, to say, and the pill mill doctors, all that kind of stuff to, cramp down on that. But with just the massive flood of fentanyl coming into our country, it seems overwhelming of how it seems like we can't stop it. And the best tool right now is really harm reduction until we kind of turn a corner on something. What's your take on this crisis right now?
We had 100,000 people die last year, right? It grew by 30%. We're seeing people younger and younger become strung out, addicted, and passing away, right? Needlessly. You have over 100 people die every single day from opioid overdose. And it doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't. We have a plan. We have a plan that we really believe is going to work to save a lot of people. And we're going to destigmatize it, and we're going to get it out there. And we need people like you. We need people like you that are going to platform us, put us out there, talk about us, donate, fund us, because what's going to happen is we're going to get out there and save lives. And my take on it is I believe that we can change it. I think society right now is changing and focusing, especially we focus on 18 to 35-year-olds, and people want to make the world a better place. They care. And I think that, in the next few years, I think we're going to see an increase. I think we're going to see newer drugs that are more deadly come out. But I think and believe that if we continue with the work that we're doing and we expand these services across the nation, we're going to save a lot of people.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned something a little bit earlier. And, the way I kind of think about it is we have on TV, the pharmaceutical companies just badgering us with pills. Hey, take this pill, you get better. Take this pill, you get better. And then, like you mentioned, if someone takes a pill and they die or overdose, oh, they're a bad person, right? And it's just this. It's very ironic, but yeah, I agree with you, and it's very scary. And I you think fentanyl's bad, but I hope to God something more powerful does not come out. It scares the living crap out of me. So, Theo, I really, first of all, thank you for your time. I know how busy you are. I didn't realize you're also active 72 hours a week doing firefighting, and then also this. That's a wild schedule. But, first of all, I want to thank you and for what you and your team are doing in helping save lives and training many others. So, first of all, people, please go to endoverdose.net if you want Narcan and or fentanyl test strips and or just training as well. So you can train in case someone else has Narcan on hand, what to do in that moment. It's a really wonderful site, very beneficial for this whole nation. I know that. So Theo, thank you again for your time, your story, and everything that you do.
Thank you. Thanks for taking the time and having us.
Yeah, perfect. Well, thank you so much. Take care, everyone. Thank you for listening to the Henry's Uncle podcast. Please like, subscribe, and leave us a review. If you would like to learn more about our nonprofit, please go to henrysuncle.org. As we say here at Henry's Uncle, you are loved, never judged.